Welcome back to Central Florida Spotlight. Joined now by another one of the candidates running for state attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit, Ryan Williams. Again, thank you for being here. And we were conversing about all the cases that you've been a part of, that you're on television maybe more than we are because you find yourself in the midst of those big cases. How does that happen? How have you been selected to be there for some of these big trials, state versus people that are household names?
Well, Bestman-Okafor was the first case that I got involved in at the Capitol level, and that started when I actually walked down the hall to the office of Jim Altman, who was the lead prosecutor, because I had heard he wanted some help. So he asked me to help him with some videos, and I sat on the co-defendant's case, and that turned into having half the witnesses, and by the time Mr. Okafor went to trial, I got to do the closing argument. So I kind of volunteered, and when you volunteer, there's plenty of work at the state. So you would get opportunities to try to help your community. Most recently, the killing of the 2 Kissimmee police officers. You were in court. You were part of the prosecution team that ultimately got the jury to agree to the death penalty. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That case was assigned to us in August of 2017, and we wrapped it up with a jury verdict in November, and we're just waiting on some of the hearings that are going to require that case to go forward so that the judge can decide whether or not which sentence he wishes to impose. Something that people may or may not be familiar with is that you decided to leave Aramis Ayala's office in 2017 when she made the announcement that she would not seek the death penalty in Markeith Lloyd's case, or any case for that matter. Why did you do that? I thought the law was clear that she needed to at least consider the death penalty, but it goes deeper than that. So about 3 weeks before this happened, the chief assistant, Deborah Barra, came to me and said that the state attorney wanted us to bring in one of the survivors of a homicide. In this case, it was Juan Rosario, another case that I tried, because she wanted to see the other side of the argument. Now, my first thought was, well, that's our side of the argument, that's the victims. So I asked the survivor, the daughter of this victim, to come in, and she sat with Miss Ayala for about an hour with me present and went over the worst thing that's ever happened to her and talked about her mother. And then I found out that about 2 weeks before that, Miss Ayala had been conversing with people in New York and Washington, D.C. about the rollout of her decision. In other words, she had asked me to put this woman through a very difficult hour, reliving horrible memories, because she wanted some political theater, and that infuriated me. Between that and her decision to not follow the law, I felt like I couldn't stay and still maintain my integrity and professionalism. And I was fortunate enough that Brad King, the state attorney of the 5th Circuit, reached out to me and asked me to come and try the cases that had been removed by the governor, and I've been doing that ever since. You used the word theater earlier. I looked at your website. You are not a politician, you're a prosecutor, and you're proud of that. That's why I brought up some of your history of being in the trenches. How will that serve you if you become our next state attorney? I think it's an important insight because you know what the people you're leading have to do on a daily basis. Anybody who's ever had a manager who didn't do their job or doesn't really appreciate what their job is knows how frustrating that can be, and how it's very difficult to follow their lead if they're not leading by example. There's a lot more to being the elected state attorney than trying cases. But I think having that experience, and more importantly, leading by example, is an important aspect of it. How do you prove to the public that you're the right man for the job? Through my actions. I have been a leader in the community in the Office of the State Attorney for the last 5 years. To your earlier point, when Miss Ayala took a step that the Supreme Court eventually said was wrong, I stood up and said, no, that's not correct. And there are people there who stayed, and they decided not to leave, and I understand that decision, but I thought it was important to let the community know that it was wrong and that the law was not being followed. So, no, I am not a grandstander. My approach with juries is very much like it will be in this election, as I tell the truth. And people generally trust me. One of the most recent issues that has come before her office, you no longer work alongside, Nicole Montalvo's murder. It's resulted in a nasty political fight. The governor's got involved between Ayala now and Osceola Sheriff Russ Gibson. Who's to blame for the way this has played out? I thought about that. I don't know who's to blame because I have not been involved in the lead up to what has actually occurred. And even though the 5th Circuit, my boss, Brad King, has been assigned to handle that case, I will not be involved. What I do know is that that is that situation is a function of the broken relationship between law enforcement and the state attorney's office. I mean, it is highly unusual to see a law enforcement agency or the head of that agency so at odds with the elected state attorney, because we have to work together so closely. And what I see when I see the two of them holding dueling press conferences and arguing with each other is a broken relationship, and that's really problematic because the public needs to understand that we have that relationship and have that trust in us that we're working together to make sure that we make our community safe. And that is one of the primary reasons that I decided to run for state attorney.
Of course, it would have to go to court to see who actually is convicted, if anyone is, of her murder. But Nicole Montalvo, a mother, her body was found on property, someone clearly covering this up. We cannot lose sight of the victim here through all of this fighting, correct?
That's right. I mean, politics is politics, but at the end of the day, the state attorney's role is to protect victims and to get justice for those victims and the accused.
We do know that your campaign has raised more than $103,000. You spent about $39,000 of that. How do you beat Belvin Perry?
I think I'm a long-term solution for Orange County, and I just don't think that Judge Perry is. He has a lot of experience, but I think to your point about my involvement in the community, I don't think people will think I have too little experience. It's impossible, in my opinion, to have more experience than Judge Perry has. But what I have is a passion for the job. And for the last 12 years, I've been here doing it every day. And Judge Perry, when the opportunity arose, decided to take a different course and, of course, became a major contributor to our community and has done amazing things. But he didn't want to be a prosecutor. And the other thing I know is that when this campaign is over, I'll still be a prosecutor. It may be in Lake County with Brad King, or it may be here in Orange County, but no matter what, I'm going to continue to do my job. And I think that speaks to who really has the passion for this job.
Where do you stand on the death penalty?
It's the law in Florida. I think it's appropriate in some situations and not in others. I think it should be used rarely. And our statute, our laws, lay out 12 situations where if some of those factors are present, and it's things very much like common sense. If the victim is a child under the age of 12, if the murder was particularly heinous, atrocious, and cruel, if the murder occurred during the course of another felony. These are things that just make sense. And that's what our law says. If one of these things is present, and I believe multiple need to be present, then the death penalty can be appropriate. Remember, the role of the state attorney is to decide to bring the case. At the end of the day, 12 members of our community are going to decide what they think the punishment should be.
So if you're elected, what's the first thing you change?
Very little, and this is why I say that. I've worked for 4 state attorneys in 12 years, and there's been a lot of turnover in that office, and I think the people there need some stability. So I would want to make sure that I knew exactly what was going on, how things were working, and get an assessment of the office before making radical changes. But what I really want to do is make sure that we start to retain good lawyers. What a lot of people don't know is that the Office of the State Attorney here in the Ninth Circuit had more than 60 resignations in 2019. That's a third of the workforce. Now just imagine a third of the people here at WFTV were to leave in a calendar year, the type of upheaval that would cause. Except that you're not only reporting the news, you're being responsible for doing justice in your community. We need to make sure that we keep and retain better lawyers.
Absolutely, makes perfect sense. So the other candidates beyond Judge Perry, your level of knowledge of those individuals and concern in terms of their campaigns?
I know Ms. Barra. She's a good lawyer. She's a good prosecutor. But I think Judge Perry and I agree that she has not run the office successfully. The Ninth Circuit has the lowest conviction rate in the entire state of Florida at trial. They null pros or dismiss one out of every 5 cases that they file. So they spend time working on the case and then they drop it. I also think that Ms. Barra needs to accept responsibility for that leadership. I know she talks about her management experience.
She's number 2 behind Ayala right now.
She is the chief assistant in the Ninth Circuit. And what I know is that she didn't speak out when I did.
My final question for you comes to you from father to father, Central Floridian to Central Floridian. Central Florida seems like a scary place. Is it?
There are pockets of violence in our community. And sometimes that violence spills over into places that seem safe. But my thing is, it should be safe for everyone. People living in Pine Hills shouldn't have to live in fear in their own home. And the state attorney's office combined with law enforcement, need to do a better job. And there's not a morning that goes by that I don't get up. I get up around 4 a.m. every day, and I go in my room and I kiss my kids, and I thank God that they're safe. But they shouldn't be different than kids in different neighborhoods, of different ages, of different colors. And my role and my desire is to make sure that they feel the same safety my kids do.